You're listening to Indiana Jones and the Comics Crusade on the LONGBOX CRUSADE NETWORK. Hello and welcome to Indiana Jones and the Comics Crusade. I'm your host, Jared Albrecht, the Yard Sale Artist, and I will be taking you on an adventure with me as I index all 34 issues of 1983's The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones by Marvel Comics. On this episode, we will look at issue number 11. Issue 11 was cover dated November of 1983. The script was by David Michelinie. The penciler was Kerry Gamble. Inks, Sam De La Rosa. The letterer was Joe Rosen. Colorist is Giuliana Ferretti, and the editor is Louise Jones. And now for your cover description. The cover is drawn by Kerry Gamble, and Indiana Jones stands pistol ready in his pale yellow corner box. The title logo is white with red highlights, and the main action depicts Indiana Jones holding on to a cathedral bell tower for dear life as a hulking brute is about to smash him, sending him falling to the village below. And now for a quick story synopsis. Dr. Jones starts his adventure in Australia, being chased by Aborigines for absconding with a calendar ring, and he's only saved by the intervention of Middle Eastern Ismaili warriors. The warriors work for bin Ali Ayyub, a wealthy collector of historical artifacts. He wants to hire Indy to find the mysterious fourth nail of Christ's crucifixion. Indiana passes on the deal, but bin Ali Ayyub is wise enough to know that by simply providing some clues to the nail's whereabouts, Dr. Jones will not be able to help himself. And he is right. Jones's curiosity sends him off to Spain to begin the search. No sooner does Indy link up with his old friend Tori than the two find themselves being pursued by Spanish ruffians. Indiana escapes just in time to discover that he's been herded into a bullfighting arena and an angry bull is bearing down on him. All right, folks, we are back in the Temple of Longbox, which is very deep beneath LONGBOX CRUSADE headquarters. I have another friend of mine who managed to dodge all the traps and made it down here alive. It is my friend Aaron Bossig. He runs a really cool podcast called the Hungry Trilobyte Podcast. Welcome to the Temple of Longbox, Aaron.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome stuff. Aaron and I appear on one another's shows once every year, and it's always a good time. And he's just one of those guys. It's a lot of fun to talk to. I think that'll become apparent to everyone on this episode. So, Aaron, The Further Adventures of Indiana Jones, the comic book series, 1983, comes out after Raiders of the Lost Ark, before Temple of Doom.
Mm-hmm.
And I will ask you the question I try to ask everybody who comes down here to the temple. How did you find Indiana Jones? How did you come to Indiana Jones?
I honestly have no idea, because looking back at me getting into the movies, me getting into movies in general, I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know who Indiana Jones was. There were always about 3 movies. I have vague memories of Last Crusade coming out, but I don't really remember when I decided I had to go see it. I'm sure that I watched the first 2 movies on TV, but when and how it's been so long, it doesn't matter to me anymore. I was always an Indiana Jones fan.
I think I had another person on the show. I can't remember who it was. It was kind of like that. It's I've just never known a world without Indiana Jones. And that makes sense because, as we talked before, you're just slightly younger than me. I think I was about 13 when I saw Last Crusade. So you would have been a bit younger. Like you said, you had a vague memory of that one. So, yeah, I guess Indy would have just been everywhere when you were a kid.
And I remember at the time, my thing was I really wanted to see Ghostbusters 2. That was the movie that was in my eyes at that point in time. So while Indiana Jones appealed to me, it was but Ghostbusters 2 is the thing.
Oh, gosh. we could do a whole podcast on 1989.
Oh,
the movie lineup is crazy.
It was the best year ever for movies. I strongly believe that.
I've had someone throw into contention 1984, and they are also not like 84 and 89 is the greatest head-to-head matchup of movie years ever. Mm-hmm, I think I lean towards 89 with you, Aaron, but man, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, it really is, and I can understand the arguments here, but this is not the space for it.
Right. We'll focus on the further adventures of Indiana Jones. I will ask you a follow-up question. Had you dabbled much into this comic book line, or is this something that you were like, yeah, Jared, I'll do your silly show and read a comic?
That was kind of it. I never got into this comic line. I'm not super into the Indiana Jones extended universe, if it really is one you want to call it that. I know they've had follow-ups, and I'll be honest with you, when the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles came out, I was not a fan. So I had some bad experiences as well as the good ones. I actually did like all the movies for their own reasons. So I'm not down on anything new, but it has to hit the right note. And I actually feel like this comic did.
Nice. Okay, cool. No, I think this is a really cool perspective. I think you're one of the first guys that came in here who you are something of a comic guy. Like you dabble, but you weren't like, oh, I got to get that further adventure. So that's kind of neat that we're going to get a bit of a fresh perspective on the extended universe, as you called it. Yeah, there's some comics. They did some novels. You know, Young Indiana Jones is interesting, probably a whole other podcast as well, but it's something that kind of got by me. You know, we talked on your show about my VHS collection, and I found a couple of them on VHS, and I watched them, and I thought, oh, those are okay. But apparently they didn't hit home with you, and that's that's okay.
Yeah, I will admit that I saw them under the worst possible circumstances. I saw them when they were hastily re-edited together as a series of movies rather than in their original episodic format. And that did ruin a lot of the pacing for me. Now, I'm not saying I would have liked it that much better as episodes, but didn't do it any favors.
Now you got me wondering if the VHS tapes I watched were re-edits or if they were the actual shows. Because I'm not sure. All right, a whole other conversation for another day. Let's talk about further adventures of Indiana Jones number 11. When we do that, of course, we start at the front. Of course, we look at the cover. I've described the cover for the audience already, but I need your thoughts on the cover. Aaron, what are some things that you liked about it? Did you have any bugaboos? Floor is yours, man. The cover of number 11.
I look at this and I immediately get a sensation of what would have been on the comic rack at this point in time. It is very indicative of just kind of this era of comics, particularly from Marvel, particularly from them reaching out into other people's properties. I think it's a solid cover. I would even say it's a good cover by the standards of the time. A lot of detail, but not to the point now where you see just this excessive level of shading, and you're going to see just slightly beyond 3-color artwork here. It kind of makes you capture almost like the feel of a cartoon, but to a more refined degree, if that makes any sense.
It does. You make a great point that I don't think we've talked about once in the first, 10 episodes of this podcast. This pre-digital coloring. This is before that era. So you're right. You do get a more simplified look, but the colorists had to do a lot. And in this particular cover, now that you mention it, the whole bell tower portion is done in a purple, and then the town below is done in really sort of faded colors, and the purple's real solid. And I think that helps bring the perspective a bit. And I think it's a great perspective cover with that angle looking down into the town.
And you notice the purple on the tower has a very slight gradient to it, as does the sky behind it. Yeah, which was just, it showed that they cared. They didn't have a lot at their disposal because, like we said in a different conversation, when you have a book that's kind of playing with somebody else's property, you're not always putting your A-list talent there. When it is the A-list talent, it's not always their top priority. It's not their top assignment. They're giving you a lot when they don't necessarily have to, and I always appreciate that.
Excellent point, as you always have a great perspective. And speaking of perspective, I gave myself a segue. I will say one thing that I really like about the cover, just a neat little detail, is I love the way that the muscle-bound guy's fist actually comes in front of the Indiana Jones title font logo, giving it a bit of another dimension to it. I always like it when they play with the layout in front of the logo. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a Kerry Gamble cover. If you guys are longtime comic book fans, you're going to know that Kerry Gamble, that dude can draw. And we'll talk about that a bit as we open the book and get into it, because Kerry Gamble did the interiors as well. with Sam De La Rosa, who's a great inker and a nice guy. And of course, the story was done by David Michelinie. And we have Indiana Jones, The Fourth Nail, Chapter 1. Aaron gets to come in on Part 1. I think this is a two-parter. David Michelinie loved doing two-parters on this book. I think it's a two-parter. But Aaron gets to come in on Part 1, which can be nice because my next guest is going to have to come in second half of the story. You get the setup. And over to you, Aaron. What did you think about this story? What were some of your favorite parts? What were for some of your low parts? However you want to do it, man.
I will say, especially knowing that this came before Temple of Doom, when there was only one movie and not really anything to go off of, this fits right into the part of the Indiana Jones universe that I love the most. It feels like it should be a movie plot, but you're getting it in the form of a comic book. Just to kind of give a top-level view of the story, Indiana Jones is told that he has to find the fourth nail being supposedly a nail that was supposed to be used to crucify Christ and was set aside. And that nail now has mystical powers. I love when you get Indiana Jones and he will get the power of God and he chooses to give it back. That happens in every movie to some degree or other. And it shows that while he's not always the biggest believer in the forces, he understands them, he respects them, and he knows that he shouldn't possess them. For the guy that's always proverbially kind of headstrong, it's him showing an amount of wisdom. And that's what I think defines the character. And to see that before you actually have 4 different follow-up movies is really remarkable to me.
Great insight. Yeah, I was talking with some previous guests because on Further Adventures of Indiana Jones as a title is interesting because it was kind of a rotating creators. The first couple issues were John Byrne issues, and then there's a couple other creators, and Howard Chaykin came in for a while, and it's really rotating. And for our listeners to the show, and a little bit for Aaron too, just for the knowledge, David Michelinie came on about 3 or 4 issues ago-ish, and he's going to be the solid guy on this. He's going to be the guy that really gives it a run. And I think he was the right guy, because like you said, it really does feel like that movie universe, even though he had one movie to go on, and that is super, super impressive, I think. So yeah, he's gonna give it a real good vibe, a good sense of continuity. He was big on bringing in the Raiders characters. In fact, I think Marion showed up in this one along with Marcus at some point. I think they had a conversation. So he's been bringing them in a lot. I'll tell you one thing that kind of bothered me, but not too much because it's an 80s Indiana Jones book. And I wondered if you noticed it as well. I felt bad for the Aborigines at the beginning that are chasing him because he's stolen, he does steal artifacts basically. He's obviously more virtuous than like Belloc, because Belloc steals to sell to private collectors. You never see it again. And at least Indy's putting it in a museum where it's properly cared for and respected and all that. But he literally killed a couple of Aborigine dudes who were just trying to get their thing back. And I was like, oh, that didn't age terribly well.
That's not inconsistent with my view of Indiana Jones from any of the movies. He does seem to have this slightly dark side that he doesn't like to let out, but it's kind of part of the job he does. And like you kind of hinted at with Belloc, he puts himself above Belloc because his motivations are better, but his methods are a different discussion entirely.
Yeah, he could do with a bit more diplomacy, I wouldn't lie. But I do remind myself, and I know that you're good at this too, that this is really based off of 1930s serials. And that was more for better or worse. It was more of a mindset of the time. But aside from that, like you said, I've always been impressed with how Indiana Jones in general, no matter where we find him, he tries to do the right thing. He gets the Ark, but he knows that no one should have it because it's so deadly. So it's best that it ends up in a warehouse somewhere, right? And that kind of thing. He gets the Shankara stones and he gives them to the village because they need them, right? And he just has a long history of ultimately doing what's right, even though there might be some sticky spots along the way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's what makes the character enjoyable. It's what makes him compelling. And I like the fact that, despite the fact that he does this stuff, he's ultimately a teacher. And that's something that you just kind of forget about 15 minutes in when he goes off on these adventures, but he always wants to come back and just start grading papers. And I always have to wonder, when you see the big map and the little line going across the ocean to show where he's traveling to, it's like, What is he doing on this incredibly long flight? Is that when he's actually getting his papers graded?
Yeah, he's grading papers. It probably is. He probably is. Another thing that I dug about this one, I had to give a high for what's the word I want to use? You kind of hinted to, like, the world travel, like it's Australia to, he meets this really cool guy who's obviously going to be the bad guy who lives in like this historic cave. And the really bad guy has like Middle Eastern dudes that work for him. And then everybody ends up in Spain. There's Aborigines, there's Middle Eastern dudes. There's Indy, there's his Spanish friend, and the people are driving in Spain. It's has that big whirlwind of the world appeal to it, which I think is very Indiana Jones as well.
And as I always try to, keep in mind, to get from Australia to Spain today is a rough trip. Back in the 30s, I mean, you would set aside a week to do this.
Yeah. I think you'd be lucky to be there in a week. Yes. Oh, so yeah, we did touch base with Marcus and Marion once again, and then the big ball really gets rolling when he gets to Spain, and he's looking for, you know what, I think it bears mentioning in the story too, that the guy who's, I think, kind of clearly going to be our villain who lives in the side of a cave in a historical thing, he's got a really baller apartment. Let's put that, he's awesome. But I love the fact that he was basically like, Indiana Jones, I brought you here to find the fourth nail. And then he's like, that's not my bag. I'm not what I'm here for. I'm good. And dude didn't even try to convince him. He just knew, if I plant this seed in Indiana Jones's mind, he's going to go look for the fourth nail. I thought that was great.
I had the sensation that he's used to people not necessarily being on board with helping him right away, but he knows he has enough power and influence that he can eventually manipulate the circumstances so that they're not going to have a choice.
Yeah, but like he didn't have to do it in like a mean way. He's just like, once I tell this guy I've got some intel, he's not going to be able to help himself. And then, we end up in Spain, and you get that sort of friend of Indy, kind of like Sala is, an old friend of his that we haven't met in any movies or anything, but his friend in Spain, and hijinks ensue, and they get chased around, and then we end it with a cliffhanger. A really well-drawn cliffhanger, by the way, if you ask me. What did you think of that final splash page of the story?
I thought it was extremely well done. It has a lot of the perspective you were just mentioning there, a nice 3D effect there. Throughout this book, and the last page really does kind of put a nice cap on it, is that you're getting... It's a great use of almost negative space where they're just providing just enough detail to create a background, create this environment of... In this case, he's in the pen at the bullfight. Spoiler, sorry, it's a 30-year-old comic.
They'll be okay.
Sorry.
They'll be okay.
and really, you have a bare minimum of detail on the beams and the ceiling and the walls, but a high amount of it on Indy himself and the thing that he's afraid of. I'm going to spare you that particular detail, but he's really afraid of something. And that and Indy are the only things that have a high level of detail. And that works so well.
It really does. Any other thought? I'm going to get your thought on the art overall here in just a second. Although you did just lay out a good bit of it. Any other thoughts on the story, though? I want you to have the floor. If you had any other thoughts of the story on this one.
Well, it's the kind of thing that if every comic in this series is like this, I really want to read it. It draws me in. It's told at roughly the same pace I would expect one of the movies to be told. It tends to be, we talked about it, it's a lot like the old movie serials where almost every scene is this mini chapter in itself of Indy gets himself into a scrape and then he gets himself out of it.
Yes. Well said.
What I love about the Indiana Jones movies is like they really do become almost a series of little tiny mini movies in themselves that just kind of end up putting a story together at the very end. The movie tends to play that out very well. The locales are very believable. They have this effect of, well, clearly there's danger here. There's elaborate traps, and yet it doesn't feel like it feels like it is the world that we live in, which is another thing I always liked about Indiana Jones. Yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, if you've dug into any sort of history of Indiana Jones, you know that George Lucas was all about the Saturday matinee style storytelling, and it's still here in this book, just like you said. And you said something that was really, you always do, Aaron. You said something that really stuck with me. You're like, if they were all like this is a series you want to read. And I will say, the vast majority of them are like this. And this series runs 30 something issues. It's not super long, but it is a ton of fun. We mentioned Kerry Gamble and Sam De La Rosa's artwork in this. I'm just going to jump out in front of you and say, because I have this perspective of the last 11 issues now, this might be the best looking issue that they've done. And John Byrne did issues 1 and 2. So that's something, because those Byrne issues were incredible. I mean, I haven't seen a bad one. Let me put it that way. But I just thought the pacing, the level of detail, the ink work, the panel layouts, I found this to be nearly flawless. But that's just my opinion. Let's hear from Aaron.
I will definitely say I would agree with you that this is extremely good work here, particularly the scenes in Australia where they're using basically a very fuzzy effect, a layering effect of showing the different little waves of, I'm guessing, wind and dust that are blowing around and giving the effect of being very difficult to see and yet conveying a lot of detail of what is going on. And that seems like it should be a contradiction, but it's not. It makes an effect that I don't really, I think is very, very well done. And I hate that, like, again, I'm looking at some of the skylines here and all that detail on the wind and the dust against a plain color sky. And again, that goes into sky being a very negative space on the frame, that you get all the detail where it needs to be. And this is what I do miss about comics from this era, is that they have a way of focusing your eyes and really making you put a lot of the scene in your imagination. And I'm also going to toss out that the character Indiana Jones doesn't necessarily look like Harrison Ford. That doesn't seem to be something that's endemic into the comics. So they're trying to just make him into Indiana Jones as a character. And I think that's a nice move.
Yes. This is very much like the Star Wars comics that Marvel ran for several years in the 70s, late 70s and into the 80s, in that they only get the likeness rights when they actually do the adaptations. So if you read in my fancy hardbound here that I had the whole series hardbound, I went ahead and had the adaptations done as well. The adaptations, they have the likeness rights. So he does look like Harrison Ford. But once you get into the regular series, I don't think they had his likeness rights. I think they just had the IP, but not Harrison Ford's, bless off. So they do move him around. But they did that in the Star Wars comics as well. So, yeah. And I like the model that they've kind of landed on here. I think it's close enough to Harrison, but it's its own thing. So, Yep, good eye on you there. I thought he looked more like Harrison in this one than he has in books of the past, but still not close enough to fool whole Aaron Bossig over there. All right. And we tend to wrap this up with talking about an ad. And we flipped through the ads before we clicked the record button. And my good friend Aaron decided that he wanted to talk about the full-page ad that's inside the back cover for the Kool-Aid Man video game. When the thirsties are after you, what can you do? Mix up the Kool-Aid drink mix before they get to you. From Mattel Electronics. Aaron, regale me on why you picked that ad.
I picked this ad because it pokes a little part of my brain that is very much stuck in this time here. And granted, I was a little too young to play Kool-Aid Man on the Intellivision, but I was a Kool-Aid drinker. I still am. I love the stuff. I used to read Kool-Aid Man comics in my comics all the time because there would always be, back when I would get them, there would be the Kool-Aid Man ad would be a little mini comic story. And that's kind of part of what you're seeing here is like the thirsties are attacking Kool-Aid Man. He's fighting back. And that was the kind of gibberish story that you would get in one of the comics I used to read here. And I really just wonder if this kind of thing is part of comics today, where you actually have the products that are trying to sell themselves to you are making little mini comics and little mini stories. Because we had stuff like this all over the place. We had Kool-Aid Man, and we had the Marvel characters trying to save the hostess fruit pies, and we had the honeycomb hideout, and everything tried to make its own little world to draw you in. The McDonald's thing, for crying out loud, that's its own cinematic universe back when we were little. I mean, it was, people act like this has to be some sort of vicious, evil thing because you're sucking kids in and trying, like, kids just like cartoons. Kids just like stories. We're going to drink the sugar water anyway. Let's have fun while we're doing it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. You got my brain going now on the Fry Guys and Mayor McCheese and and all that stuff from the McDonald's ads.
And then I see this, and I played the Kool-Aid video game on an emulator. I love it. It's what I think one of my favorite games for the Atari. I think it's on Atari, right? There's Atari.
Yeah, I'm sure they probably did on Atari and ColecoVision. Like that's everything was on those systems back then.
Yeah, I have a good time with it, and it's just the next step from having the little mini comic. It's like, oh, you actually have a video game, and I'm okay with that.
I love it. This is why I like having you on the show. You always have these neat insights on these kind of things. I think that's great. Well, that about actually wraps up the further adventures of Indiana Jones and number 11. Now, I usually drop in a little segment where I say, hey, it's interesting that almost always there's something in the book that shows up in a later movie. It's really weird how there almost always is that something, a little something in the comic shows up in a later movie. This one, I didn't have anything leap out to me other than a big part of this, like the cover talks about is him fighting a really giant muscle-bound guy, but he does that in every movie. He did that in Raiders next to the airplane. He did it in Temple of Doom with the giant dude who got killed in the Rock Smasher. Spoiler if you never saw Temple of Doom. So I can't really give myself credit for that one because it did appear in the first movie. Other than that, there's a fair amount of originality in this one. The only thing that I will say that I felt a bit of a tie-in with Last Crusade is they spend a fair amount of time in their adventure in here going through a cathedral. Mm-hmm. They kind of do some cathedral diving and hunting in Last Crusade as they're looking for the stuff. This isn't so much treasure hunting and part of the adventure as it is just sort of a set piece. So very tenuous connections for once. This is one of the rare books where I couldn't find something that was like, yes, this definitely happens in a future movie. Let you down this time, listeners, but that's the best I can do.
That just means it's a unique experience in and of itself.
Yes. And this is one of the most fun stories that we've had so far, just in my opinion, here on number 11. So I'm glad you got to experience this one, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem. If people want to experience the Hungry Trilobyte podcast and all the glory that is Aaron Bossig, how do they do that, my friend?
You can find me on the social media of your choice. I do Blue Sky and Instagram at Aaron Bossig. I have a Twitter account that is now dormant. You can find Hungry Trilobyte, spelled BYTE, on any podcast catcher you want. And if you want to start out with something relevant to this comic, I did have Sam De La Rosa on my show in episode 106. It was a short episode. It was not a very in-depth chat, but we got to talk at Dallas Fan Expo.
Nice. Well, that is good stuff. I highly recommend it. Aaron always has a unique view on things. And what I always appreciate the most is it's almost always, I can't think of a time when it wasn't, it has a good positive spin. Aaron just likes things and he likes people who likes things. So we applaud that at the Longbox Crusade Network. And we're happy to recommend the Hungry Trilobyte podcast.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to me.
Hey, no problem, man. And hey, thanks for coming down to the Temple of Longbox. Good luck navigating those traps on your way back out.
I'll do my best.
You can find me at Yard Sale Artist on X, Facebook, and Instagram. It's all at Yard Sale Artist. You can check out my artwares at www.theyardsaleartist.com. And of course, we'd love for you to check out the Longbox Crusade in all its locations. We are at Longbox Crusade on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You name it, you can probably find us out there at Longbox Crusade. Of course, you can call and leave a voicemail, 707-532-5269, 707-532-LBOX. We'd love to hear from you. And this is one of our shorter shows, so I will just say thank you to all the Patreon members out there. Our Crusaders Club members are the best, and they keep this stuff going. Thank you so much. I look forward to reading your names on a longer episode in the near future. With that, thanks for joining us again down here in the Temple of Longbox, and we will see you soon.
We're named the dog, Indiana. The dog? You are named after the dog?
Got a lot of fond memories of that dog.
What's his name? Henry Jones Jr. Like Indiana.
May we go home now, please?